Hello and welcome to our session on mergers and acquisition. Now, in the growth dialogue of any firm, it may choose to grow in more ways than one. In the normal scheme of things, sometimes we find firms growing organically, meaning that they grow slowly by expanding into areas and then growing from the original business piece. However, in some cases, when firms decide to grow, they may choose the path of either combining with others or actually buying up existing firms. Now, for this session, we're going to walk through the basics of mergers and acquisitions and related issues. At the end of the session, students should be able to clearly indicate the various pathways within the mergers and acquisition concept. And two, should be able to explain the legitimate and dubious motives that may be pursued for mergers and acquisition, and also be able to illustrate some of the defensive tactics that may be employed by firms within the mergers and acquisition terrain. Now, our session outline will look at the market for corporate control in general, the motives for mergers, evaluating mergers, and some of the tactics used within the merger arena. Now, what is a merger? Now, typically when we combine two business entities under common ownership, or we have two firms coalescing and sharing resources in order to realize a goal, we are typically within the terrain of mergers and acquisition. But more often than not, one party always dominates. Now, in the typical case of an acquisition, one firm buys the assets or the shares of another. In the takeover case, it implies that the acquiring firm is larger than the target firm, and we can have a situation where there's a reverse takeover if the target is larger than the acquirer. Now, in acquisition, the firm can be acquired by another firm or set of individuals by purchasing the voting shares of the firm's stock. It may be through a tender offer, that's a public offer to buy the shares, or through stock acquisition. In this case, no stockholder vote required. It normally may deal directly with shareholders, even if management is not friendly. And sometimes this may cause delays if some target shareholders decide to hold out for more money. And of course, to be able to do that, then a complete absorption will require a merger. Now, when there is a merger with consolidation, that means two different companies merge and form a totally different company. On the other hand, we can qualify one as an acquisition where a bigger company literally takes over, absorbs a smaller company, and at the end of the day is the first company or the acquiring company that is visible for all to see. So those are some of the dynamics as far as mergers with consolidation and acquisitions are concerned. Now, who are the parties to acquisitions? Normally, there's a target company, or known as a target. That is the company being acquired, and the acquiring company or the acquirer is the company acquiring the target. Now, the acquisition can be classified based on endorsement of the party's management. It will be considered a hostile takeover when the target company's board of directors objects to the takeover offer. It would, however, be considered a friendly one when the target company board of directors endorse the merger or the acquisition offer. Now, in terms of the classification, we can have the relatedness also being considered. So how related is the business activities of the parties within the discussion? It's a horizontal merger where the companies are in the same line of business, often competitors. Now, in the Ghanaian case, you can look at that as the example between the Guinness Ghana and then the one that occurred between EcoBank and the Trust Bank. Now, obviously, these institutions were within the same framework, same business, competitors, and then there was a merger. Of course, in the case of EcoBank, EcoBank literally became the superior one that is visible, and TTB was completely absorbed. Now, in the case of a vertical case, that has to do with within the production line. So from the beginning stream to the very end stream of the production cycle within a particular industry, where there's a vertical merger, what it means is that within the same line of production, one goes into acquire. So an example is where Google acquired Motorola Mobility Holdings somewhere in June 2012. And when we have a conglomerate merger, it means the firms in question belong to unrelated lines of businesses. So those are 2 or 3 different businesses combined as one, and that becomes a conglomerate merger. Now, what are the motives for mergers? Now, the main motive, or the more positive ones, are the motives for creating value. And so that is where the synergy, that is combining the parts, generates better value than the individual parts together. And then too, there's also the potential for growth. Another good motive would be to increase the market power of an existing, or by combining their resources, they're going to increase their market power. And of course, also that by combining, they acquire unique capabilities or resources that can enhance value. Or by merging, they create value by unblocking some hidden value that is not visible in either two, but only comes out when the two come together. In some cases, there are cross-border mergers, which may be to exploit market imperfections, or sometimes used to overcome adverse government policy in one setting by moving or going into another setting and merging or acquiring another firm there. Sometimes it has a way of being the conduit for technology transfer, or to help in product differentiation, or in some cases, it's as a result of the need to follow clients. Now, we can actually have dubious motives for mergers, and that has to do with diversification. Now, diversification is not a strong enough point to want to consider a merger. And then also bootstrapping of earnings, that's making the most of earnings, is not necessarily a very viable motive for embarking on a merger. And also another dubious motive has to do with managers' personal incentives. Now, this may be ultra-virus to the incentives or the desires of shareholders, and tax considerations are also considered dubious motives for embarking on mergers or acquisitions. Now, let's look at categorizing the basic characteristics that play out within the mergers and acquisition terrain. Now, the form of the transaction may either be a stock purchase or an assets purchase. Now, the method of payment or the mode of payment may either be cash, securities, or a combination of the two. Now, in more cases than one, cash securities are paid by the acquiring firm when the belief is that there's more value to be unlocked by acquiring the target. Hence, the acquiring firm is eager to pay off the firm to be acquired, the shareholders of the firm to be acquired, so that they can have it all in terms of the potential value to be created. Now, in some cases, the acquiring firm may issue securities, its own securities, to the shareholders of the firm that is being acquired, so that they also become joint shareholders of the new business that is going to come into play. Now, the attitude of managers, as already indicated, can either be hostile or friendly. Hostile where they are not interested, and then friendly when they see it as something worth their while. Now, in acquiring the stock, which may be one of the modes for the purchase, a tender offer can be made, and this is a public offer to buy the shares, normally made by one firm directly to the shareholders of another firm. Now, if the shareholders choose to accept the offer, they tender their shares by exchanging them for cash or securities. Now, a tender offer is frequently contingent on the bidders obtaining some percentage of the total voting shares. If not enough shares are tendered, then the offer might be withdrawn or reformulated. Now, in some cases, in order to facilitate this acquisition or merger, an offer may be made by one company to buy the shares of another for a much higher per share price than the company is truly worth. A bear hug is usually made when there's doubt that the target company's management will be willing to sell. So by offering a very lucrative price, the shareholders usually will be more than willing to sell and walk. That is what we categorize as a bear hug. Now, as already discussed, between the hostile and the friendly takeovers, where the takeover is not so friendly, there are a number of defenses that may begin to rear their heads, and these are sometimes either pre-offer defense mechanisms or the post the offer. Within the pre-offer categories, you've got issues like poison pills or poison puts. Now, we can also incorporate in jurisdictions that have restrictive takeover laws, or we stagger the board to make it difficult to get the whole board approving the takeover. Sometimes we provide restricted voting rights to shareholders in some of these issues, and then there could be supermajority voting provisions, meaning that when certain majority cutoffs are not attained, the takeover will not be successful. And then there's also the issue of fair price amendments, where there is the need to revise or to relook at the true value of the firm, or in some cases the provision of golden parachutes. Now, post the offer, sometimes a just say no defense, in which case the firm decides not to agree, or the issue of green mail, leverage recapitalization, crown jewel defenses, Pac-Man defense, white man, and the white square. Let's look at some of these. Now, with a poison pill, it's typically a rights offering that gives the target shareholders the right to buy shares in either the target or an acquirer at a deeply discounted price. Now, because target shareholders can purchase the shares at less than the market price, then the existing shareholders of the acquirer effectively are subsidizing their purchases, making the takeover so expensive that the acquiring shareholders may choose to pass on the bill. Now, poison pills are measures of true desperation and may make the firm unattractive to bidders, but in turn could also reduce shareholder wealth. Now, another example of a defense mechanism is a golden parachute. Now, this is normally an extremely lucrative severance package that is guaranteed to a firm's senior management in the event that the firm is taken over and the managers are let go. Of course, what it means is that in a typical merger and acquisition situation, managers are normally, top management is let go because the acquiring firm would have relevant managers or the relevant skills to take over those roles. And so a golden parachute assures that if managers are to be let go, then they get extremely lucrative severance packages. Now, depending on how extremely lucrative they are, these packages can actually scare off bidders and therefore foil a plan to take over. Now, if a golden parachute exists, therefore, management will be more likely to be receptive of a takeover, lessening the likelihood of managerial entrenchment. But then the question to ask is whether this is favorable for the shareholder or not. We also have a case where there could be a white knight. Now, this is more like a reverse, where a target company's defense against what is considered a hostile takeover attempt, the firm that is being targeted looks for another friendlier company to acquire it. Now, we also have the white knight, which is a variant of the white knight's defense, that's the white square, in which a large and passive investor or firm will agree to purchase a substantial block of shares in a target firm and with special voting rights, hence foiling every attempt of the hostile acquirer in the acquisition bid. We also have the Pac-Man defense, where the targeted firm in a hostile takeover situation turns around and rather tries to acquire the company that has made the hostile takeover attempt, similar to the game of Pac-Man where there's the attack and then the reverse attack. Now, in terms of analyzing measures for the final decision of whether to proceed or not to proceed, the discounted cash flow method, normally the use of methods that impute time value of money, is normally the way to go in the valuation of the target company. And of course, the cash flows to use, the most appropriate is the free cash flow, which is the cash flow after capital expenditures necessary to maintain the company as a going concern. So obviously the goal is to estimate the future cash flows, which we can derive by using the pro forma financial statements, which we have discussed previously in earlier sessions on FINC 301. And then we can also use a two-stage model where we can more accurately estimate growth in the near future, then assuming a somewhat slower growth into the indefinite future, arrive at the relevant free cash flow estimations and then the horizon values, and from there be able to determine whether the present value of the expected cash flows from the target firm to be acquired are worth or present a positive NPV in relation to the price that is being asked for. And if the NPV is positive, then the firm can be acquired. So these are some basic summaries you should carry along with you even as you leave this class. Now, an acquisition is typically the purchase of some portion of one company by another, whereas the merger represents the absorption of one by another. Mergers may be a statutory one, as a subsidiary merger, or a consolidation where two different firms come together and end up forming a completely different firm in the long run. Now, horizontal mergers occur among peer companies normally engaged in the same kind of business, whereas vertical mergers occur among companies along a given value chain. Now, conglomerates, on the other hand, are formed by companies in very unrelated businesses. Now, there are a number of motives for mergers or acquisitions, some justified and some dubious. Now, in terms of a merger, it may take the form of stock purchase or asset purchase, the decision of which approach to take will affect other aspects of the transaction. Now, in terms of payment, it may be cash, securities, or a combination of both. Now, where there are transactions that are hostile, these are those that are opposed by the target managers, and the friendly ones are those that are endorsed by the target company's managers. Now, there are a number of defenses that can be employed when there are takeover offers, and these defenses can be either before or after the unwarranted or unwanted takeover bid. Thank you so much for your time. We have come to the end of our sessions. See you another time.